Now to Victoria, where we're saddled with a government that is very good at politics but terrible at governing. Whether it's the shambolic mess they've made of major projects, the mismanagement of vital services, or the fact that the Victorian government has accumulated the biggest state debt in the country, and by some margin, well, this Labor government has proved to be hopelessly incompetent. But surprisingly, still pretty popular. It helps when you have a feeble opposition and a largely supportive media. Now, the latest Victorian blunder could see thousands of criminals having their convictions quashed thanks to more than 1,200 police officers being incorrectly sworn in between 2014 and 2021. Now, the amendment to the Victorian Police Act was made by the Napthine government, but it's been Labor who've been in government since 2014 to 2021. And yes, we've had more than 1,200 police officers arresting people, serving warrants, carrying weapons, all without being properly sworn in and having the valid powers to do all those things. This week, the first of what is expected to be many accused criminals walked free from jail after successfully arguing that the serious charges against him were invalid, as the officer who charged him was among those who were not properly sworn in. Magistrate Tony Parsons struck out all the man's charges, and he said, "The prosecution is tainted to the extent that the police informant has not been sworn in. To deprive the defendant of his liberty in this circumstance is an abuse of process." We were warned this could happen when we first found out about this massive stuff-up 2 weeks ago. And we've just had the first accused criminal walk free with all charges struck out. It's important to note here that the state opposition has not sought to make political capital of this crisis, and they backed retrospective legislation Labor introduced to backdate the affected police officers' powers. That legislation passed Parliament this week, but it's unlikely that simply passing retrospective legislation will resolve this crisis. A number of legal experts, including QCs, have argued that the impact of the swearing-in blunder could be felt for years to come. And what that means is not just criminals and accused criminals walking free due to a technicality, but our courts being clogged up even more. We'll have a leading QC join us shortly to take us through this mess. And finally, before I bring in my first guest, let's pay tribute to the courage of former Labor MP Kshalia Vaghela, who stood up in Parliament yesterday and called out those who've tormented her, which according to her includes the Premier of Victoria.
When I became a member of his caucus, the Premier was a different man towards me. He was hostile, he would not speak or acknowledge me, he treated me like I was invisible. The Premier would brush past me at events and publicly embrace the bullies and their friends as if to reward and encourage their bullying behaviour.
Funnily enough, all those feminists and women's rights campaigners who talk endlessly about toxic workplaces and the treatment of women are silent on this one.